Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forward Motion. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very, very happy to introduce my guests today. They are a married couple who lost their beloved son at the age of 7 to a very sad and tragic form of cancer. All cancer is sad and tragic. But this adorable young boy, whose picture we will soon show you, Matthew Joseph Brown, Mattie, is the reason for a wonderful foundation that they created called the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation for a very specific reason. First of all, let me introduce them. Victoria Sardi-Brown, and Peter J. Brown. Vicky is the, CEO or president?
President.
I'm getting it wrong. One of them is the CEO, one of them is the president, but they both co-founded this very important foundation.
Right.
The foundation, as I said, is called the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation. First of all, 15,700 families each year in the U.S. have a child with cancer. That is a shocking amount of children.
It is.
I also understood that many children around the age of 6, for some reason, the average age is 6, develop cancer.
Yes.
And I don't know why that is. That is, Mattie developed his cancer at 6 years and 3 months.
Right.
Correct.
Except that was unusual for osteosarcoma, the kind of cancer Mattie had.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me, before we get to Mattie's foundation, tell me a little bit about what happened, Vicki.
Well, Mattie was born a healthy and happy child, and up until age 6, and then that particular summer, in July of 2008, he was enrolled into a tennis camp. And after the first week of camp, he was complaining. His arm was bothering him, but we figured, it's not such a big deal because, you haven't used those muscles before. By week 2, he could barely lift his arm, and he was really complaining of pain. So at that point, Peter and I knew we need to take him to the pediatrician. And fortunately, we had a great pediatrician because she didn't, placate us or belittle the symptoms that we were reporting. Instead, she prescribed an X-ray that day, and so we walked over to the hospital, Mattie and I, to do the X-ray, which that's a whole nother story in and of itself.
And we're looking at some pictures of your beautiful son.
Oh, yes.
Oh, nice.
And
what a lovely young boy he was.
He was a beautiful boy, and a very bright fellow, and full of life. And so that day, right after the X-ray, we learned that he had a big tumor in his arm, something called osteosarcoma, which of course I didn't even know what that was when they told me. But Mattie's case of osteosarcoma was very unusual because he had 4 bone tumors at diagnosis. And so that's very rare.
That means it had been growing for a while?
Well, we're not really sure.
But
Possibly.
A lot. That's a lot of
It's a
tumor.
lot, and typically, like as his doctor once told us, that there's a case like Mattie's maybe once every decade around the entire world.
Wow.
So it was a very rare form
Highly
of
unusual.
osteosarcoma.
Oh, so sad.
Yeah,
So he began treatment.
right. Right. He began treatment at the
14
end
months of
July.
treatment.
Yeah.
But I also read that after 11 months, he had tumors in his lungs.
Correct.
Yeah, and it had metastasized to his body. So
First of all, hearing it the first time that your son had cancer after a tennis camp at the age of 6, right there,
Right.
your life changes.
Correct.
His life changes, and you're like blown
permanently.
away
Yep.
forever.
Right.
You don't know what to think.
No.
But of course, you're hoping for a cure.
Obviously.
Peter, at 11 months later, and you're hearing that it's in the lungs, at what point do you, I read, so I know, but conversations at some point turn from curative to end-of-life discussions.
Correct.
What is that like?
Your worst nightmare. It really is. I mean, the whole diagnosis from the moment that Mattie was diagnosed with cancer, there's an instant loss. Because now you've got this picture of a healthy child and a healthy future and all the prospects of a great life. And then you hear cancer, and suddenly, you know, we all have this perception or understanding, in some cases, experiences with cancer. We know it's bad. It's really bad. You're just not sure how bad it's going to get. In this case, you have a 6-year-old child who's not diagnosed, and now you start talking about taking bones out of his body as part of the treatment, giving him poison, toxins, chemotherapies, giving him radiation, and doing all sorts of things. So you go through a whole series of losses, and when you get to, it was August 4th, 2009, that we were pulled aside because Vicki had been pushing for answers because she knew something was wrong. You could tell from Mattie something was wrong. And the conversation, literally, the doctor said, we need to turn the conversation away from curative and start talking about how to make Mattie comfortable in his remaining days. And at that point, hope has finally disappeared.
And I think, well,
how do you survive that conversation?
At
that moment?
It's a very hard kind of conversation to grasp. It really just is impossible as a parent to know that your child is dying and there is absolutely nothing that we can do about this. We're in the 21st century and medicine has not progressed. Most children are treated with medications that are 50 and 60 years old. There's only been 3 new FDA-approved medications for childhood cancer, which is stunning in of itself.
Yeah.
But there's something that Peter said that I think, besides loss happening throughout this entire process, because first it's the loss that he was diagnosed, and then there was losses all along the way when we got scan reports back that things were not going well, and then there was the loss that it metastasized to his lungs, and then the losses just continued. But there's also what we learned is that hope also changes. Because you would think your child is diagnosed, you lose hope.
Hope for a cure, though.
Yeah, that's your hope then. There's hope for cure. But as the process evolves, so does hope. Hope changes. So you may not have hope for a cure, but even toward the end, what Peter and I learned, even though Mattie was dying, we learned that hope was, we could instill hope in ourselves and in the situation because we were trying to find the most humane way for him to die that was less painful and that was potentially more peaceful, if that's possible. So hope does change.
Sure, of course. I just want to offer my most sincere and heartfelt condolences, and I know that's not enough because I don't know what it's like to lose a child, but imagining it is the worst thing ever.
It pretty much is.
And it changes your life forever. I know it's never the same.
Permanently.
No.
And I look at you now today, and I know it's still never the same. Even though I'm so glad to see that you're together still, and that you're here to talk about not just raising money for cancer. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're here also to talk about another part of the cancer process, which I wholeheartedly am amazed that you need to talk about, and that's the psychosocial journey that went on from day one for yourselves as well as for Mattie. Mattie lost the ability to do a lot of things quickly because of his treatment was severe. So he was in a wheelchair and he couldn't run, he couldn't walk, and he couldn't take himself to the bathroom and things like that. And he became depressed and anxiety, and he needed medications and things like that. You're here to say that there's no help for that. I mean, there's social workers, but what you needed was psychosocial support along the way. Can you talk about that? Because that's what your foundation's about.
Sure.
And that's what you actually have had some big success with changing the standards. And this is just from the Washington Post from December of 2015, which made a big difference. When I read this article, that's why you're on the show, and I know that we air our show, this episode will air for years to come, and that's why I said December of 2015. I want people to know that's when it aired, but your standards are going to be set for years to come.
Yes.
So I want you to talk about what standards of care did you set, and what were you looking to do with your psychosocial recommendations?
So let me start with a story, and Vicki, you can jump in. 2 months after Mattie passed away, we founded the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation. And we were going to do something. We had talked about doing something about childhood cancer and the issues we experienced while Mattie was alive. And then when he passed away, he was our only child. So we were instant empty nesters, and we needed to do something about it. So we started out with a scope a mile wide and an inch deep, and then quickly realized, because Vicki's a mental health counselor, that the one thing that was left as a residue for us from that experience was the inconsistent, in some cases lacking, in some cases really great, examples of psychosocial support. So we started going up on Capitol Hill and saying, you need to do more about childhood cancer, and particularly around the mental health issues. And they said, well, great, what standards exist? And we just kind of looked at each other and went, we don't know.
No.
So we went to go find out and quickly determined there were no standards of care. And bang, the light bulb went off, and we said, why don't we have a standard of care? There's a medical standard of care which defines the medicine and the treatment that you get upon diagnosis independent of where you go. However, there is no psychosocial standard of care for children with cancer and their families. So we said that's going to be our mission, to go about and get that developed.
Because it was glaringly missing from you guys.
It was glaringly missing. There were times and periods where it was very good, don't get me wrong, but there were also times when we were pushing, where is this, we need that. And you go to critical at some point in this entire journey. It's not a question of will you, it's a question of when. And having the resources from the beginning, from date of diagnosis, were absolutely critical to track you through this journey and this path, and try to be supportive when you do go critical.
And what does that mean, in your case?
Well, it can mean a variety of different things. So you can break down. The whole family function unit breaks down. The child stops taking treatment because they're so traumatized. The parents aren't talking to each other. The siblings are having their own behavioral issues. So the whole family unit can completely fall apart, which in the end really hurts the child, because there's data out there that shows when you provide psychosocial services, you actually help to improve health outcomes. So by giving this stuff, you actually improve their chances of having a better health outcome.
And also, childhood cancer is very much a family disease. So if the family is not being supported, and the family is usually the one who is really doing the hands-on care for the child on a day-to-day basis. So if the family is not being taken care of, the whole unit falls apart. So it's really just as crucial as the medicine.
So let me go back to the journey. So we went out there and said we need to create a standard of care. So what evidence is out there? Because in the medical model world, data, evidence, proof is necessary to justify a whole variety of different things. And so we started researching and realized fairly quickly there are a number of evidence-based findings, interventions, tools for psychosocial support, but they're not broadly disseminated. And so we started to unravel that a little bit more, and the reason why is that there is no standard of care saying that every child and their family, from date of diagnosis through the entire cancer trajectory, must get number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever those things may be, must get standards of care. And so we said, great, here's what we need to do. Let's get together a large research team and go at developing those standards and defining them.
And understand, too, that there are standards, there have been standards that have looked at childhood cancer in terms of psychosocial care in the past. It's just that most of them were not as comprehensive and evidence-based. Many of them were built on consensus, where professionals think, oh yeah, I think this should be applied, but it wasn't really, no one really delved into the research in such an extensive format as this, and certainly none of the standards ever looked at the entire cancer span from time of diagnosis through survivorship or end-of-life care. So this is a really historic moment.
So you're saying, and you've put down on paper, in fact, you've written a chapter in the book, and I believe it's called Pediatric and Blood Journal.
Yeah, we could talk about that.
Yeah.
So the standards is actually a 3.5-year-long project involving over 80 researchers, clinicians, covering hematology, oncology, psychiatry, psychology, social work, child life, patient advocacy, some survivorship. So it's got the full gambit of professions that are involved in helping to care for children with cancer and their families. And a 3.5-year-long project, we started then defining what are those standards. And that started first with a review of over 13,000 different peer-reviewed journal articles.
Wow.
Spanning the last 2
A
decades
ton.
to basically suss out about 1,300 articles that had evidence-based data. And those were then broken down into what ended up being 15 different standards. And that was actually just published in late December 2015 in the Journal of Pediatric Blood and Cancer. in a special supplement that's dedicated just to those standards. So that contains the 15 standards in one overview article. And it was not only historic, but very important because the Pediatric Blood and Journal Cancer is a Tier 1 medical hematology oncology journal.
Wow.
So those are the things that the docs read.
Which is important.
Which is very important in the medical model world.
Is that the one where you wrote a chapter?
Well,
no, that's a textbook.
Oh, okay, because I know that you wrote a chapter.
Couple of textbooks, couple of chapters.
Okay.
Yeah, just get the word out about it.
Right, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely
it's
good.
important.
It's necessary.
Yeah. It's
that
important.
was awesome. Yeah.
And just to add to the special supplement, we've paid for, Foundation's paid for permanent online open access. What does that mean? That means that anybody, you, can go online and you can download all those standards. Because normally, to get a journal article, you need to pay for it, right? No, we said no. We want to make sure this is disseminated as far as wide and wide as possible. So we paid for the permanent open access. Yep.
Very important, in fact.
Very important. It's important to get this message out.
So that, wow, okay. Very important
And
because that's, people need to know what the standards are.
Correct.
They really do.
And that's the starting point. So this is really phase one of a much bigger campaign. First, we had to go out there, get the right people, get the right evidence, get the proof that here to help develop these standards. Now we're moving into phase two, and we can talk about that in a minute if you want, but now it's about implementation. So let's take these standards and start getting them applied into standard models, into different sites, hospitals, clinics, practices, so that professionals know how to apply these standards and have the resources to do that.
That seems crucial too.
Right.
Yes.
Because if you have them, they're pretty to look at.
That's right.
But if you don't use them, then
Right.
we have another situation
Correct.
like yours.
You don't want shelfware.
No,
No.
no, and we're too passionate about them. And also the 85 people who created them, I think, are passionate about them too. Because what you need to also understand is these are professionals who donated a lot of their time and energy to create these standards, which is remarkable in and of itself. So, you know, it's hard enough to pull someone from the same profession together to work on something, but we're talking about 6 different mental health professional groups who united together to create the standards.
And I want to, if I can, build on that point. Something that we were talking about before the show, which was people ask, you've asked the question, why did you even have to have this conversation?
I do not understand. I did absolutely. That is a question. Let me ask it again. So the people at home, because they're thinking to themselves, wait a minute, doesn't this come with the treatment already? Aren't there social workers? Aren't there people already paying attention to everybody's mental health? Because that should come part and parcel with what they're dealing with. So I am surprised that you actually had to exist,
Right.
so to speak.
Well, before you answer that question, I really, that does give you pause though, because when you do talk to a majority of people about cancer, is the first thing that comes to mind psychosocial concerns, psychological concerns? I'm really not even sure that our society understands that that is a main component of treatment. This is a byproduct of treatment, that psychological concerns pop up for the patient and for the family. But I think that is something that we as a society need to be educated about, and we need to advocate about this.
Well, you think, I mean, they don't think it's the main thing, because the main thing they think is curing cancer.
Correct.
Right, and which is a medical challenge.
Right.
And there's a
They don't
medical
think about
model,
right.
and there are medical standards of care to do that, right?
Right.
But it's not just about the medicine, which, by the way, is one of the taglines of our organization. And in fact, if you were actually to sum up the amount of time that people are in treatment versus out of treatment dealing with the results of treatment, there's a disproportionate focus on the out of treatment living with the impacts of that, whether that's immediately after diagnosis through survivorship or end of life. So back to your question, why doesn't this stuff exist already? It's sort of like a duh, this should already be in place.
That's what I would think.
Right. And you mentioned social work, and it's a complicated answer, but let me just try to unpack it a little bit. In an inpatient setting where care is delivered for childhood cancer treatment, there are basically 3 professions that are reimbursable. Now we're getting into the whole insurance thing.
Yeah.
Medical doctors, nursing, and social work. And so you will see in minimally in any cancer care treatment facility those 3 professions, because those hospitals and those clinics can reimburse for that. Therefore, they can cover the cost of those professionals. How they got into that, each of those professions, doctors were sort of kind of obvious which is someone needs to deliver the medicine and manage the care. Nursing is also obvious too, because who actually does the majority of the care is nursing. And social work was there to handle everything else, predominantly resources. And that's not to belittle social work, but they're also overwhelmed in terms of trying to do that. And they don't have maybe the skills, the training, or the focus on a lot of the psychosocial assessment needs. And that's where disciplines like psychiatry, psychology in particular, and child life really complement those other 3 professions. And so truly the best practice is to have those 6 different professions working in conjunction with each other, which is another point I wanted to come to, which is psychosocial support is not the responsibility of a single profession. It's not just nursing. It's not just social work. It's actually a discipline that should be a part of every single one of those professions in an integrated care team. And that's a real change in thinking. It's a real change in the paradigm. It's a real change in reimbursement, hospital operating staffs, and just the approach to treating cancer. And I think it's even more pronounced because childhood cancer is a family diagnosis. It affects the entire family.
And I really think that when the standards have been created, they haven't been created with one profession in mind. The goal is that every individual who touches and interacts with the child and the family would need to understand the standards, would need to be able to apply the standards in a treatment setting. So again, that's also going to be it's going to be a large undertaking in terms of trying to educate and in trying to advocate and trying to get reimbursement for this. It is already happening in the adult cancer world, and so we're trying to use them as our benchmark. They already have a psychosocial standard that most hospitals have to now comply with.
It's a start.
Yeah, in order.
It's a big start then, because that means there's somewhat of a model there.
Correct.
The beginning of one, yes.
So you'd think that it would be a given, I would think, but of course, right. I want to mention your website because I know that we don't have enough time on the show to go over everything.
Sure.
It's vast as far as information goes. I found I didn't have enough time. There's so much there, and it's
Thank
very
you.
impressive. What's the name of your website? There, I have it on the screen.
Good.
I didn't want to get it wrong.
Yep.
Because my mind goes blank on a show. MattieMiracle.com. I knew that. I wrote it up there, but I forget it when I'm on the show. I just want to say there's a lot on there. And because we don't have time to talk about everything, you have several categories. I took a couple of notes, but I just want to say that you address advocacy. You're on the Hill. There's some legislation which I know we can't go into too much detail that you're working on. Just to synopsize, you basically, I know it's a lot of words, but to synopsize, you want to have what, Peter? You want to give access to everybody. Let me just read my note on
Access to psychosocial services.
Right.
Yes, basically.
You mean in terms of the legislation?
Yeah. Somewhere I wrote down.
So it's survivorship, treatment, access, and research.
Thank you.
And that's the STAR Act that's
Yes.
currently working its way through Congress.
Bingo.
Right.
It's a consolidated bill of a bunch of different initiatives over the last several years, childhood cancer bills, that was basically put into a bundle, given a cute little name called STAR.
STAR, exactly. Okay, I just wanted to briefly mention that as one of the things that you do. You educate healthcare providers on the impact of diagnosis on kids and families, awareness. You try to make people aware and you of access to support on local and national levels.
Right.
And we've talked about addressing psychosocial needs of kids and families living with childhood cancer.
Correct.
You are a 501c3 tax-exempt public charity.
Correct.
And just to give people an idea of what they're going to find, you also speak out whenever you can. You at organizations, universities, etc.
Right.
You offer online support to families. You offer training sessions and workshops. Here it is, the lobbying that I couldn't find on my notes before. Thank you,
You
Peter.
got there.
And we work with different childhood cancer organizations too, because we've also joined several alliances.
Right. I somewhere wrote the Childhood Cancer Alliance.
Yeah, the Alliance for Childhood Cancer.
Yes, thank you. And you have an annual walk, you have an item drive, a candy drive, too much, to mention in one show, but you do a lot here. Considering how much work you've done, you are very passionate about what you do. it's MattieMiracle.com if you want to help out these things. What's next on the agenda for you guys in a couple minutes we have left?
Sure.
Well, I mean, I think what's next on the agenda is trying to now create the next strategy for how to get the standards implemented.
Because implementation was stage 2, and that's where you
right.
are now. What's stage 3?
Success.
Paying.
And maybe
A party.
assessing how it's going, what could be tweaked.
And
But
the
that would be
outcomes.
it'd be beautiful if we get to stage 3.
Yeah.
Right.
Stage 1 was a hurdle,
Yeah.
but I mean, honestly, I'm not really sure people thought that we could create evidence-based standards. I think people really were not sure that could happen. And look, we did it in 3 years' time. So I think, stage 2, that's going to be hard too, but, I think we've got a great group of people behind us, and,
You have a lot of help,
We-
a lot
we-
of support,
a lot of
people believe in
professionals
this.
who
Yes.
are involved in
who are
this.
committed.
People believe in
bel-
this, and you're
Exactly.
committed. What's your day jobs? How do
This
you?
is my day job.
This is your day job.
And
This
your
is
night
my
job
full-time
and your
job.
weekend job.
It's my full-time job.
Peter, somebody has to make a living.
Well, during the day, I help run a software company that makes health solutions for people to help improve their health outcomes.
I mean, somebody actually has to pay the bills. So
And we need health insurance.
Yeah.
We've learned that.
Oh,
We
my
learned that
goodness.
Thank
first
goodness
and
we had it.
foremost.
amazing.
Yeah.
I want to wish you both the best of luck.
Well,
I'll be
thank you.
following you. Thank you so much for coming and sharing
Yes, thank
about
you.
your beloved, wonderful son, Mattie. I'm sure you miss him every single day.
We do.
Yes.
It's the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation, MattieMiracle.com. This is Vicki and Peter Brown, the CEOs and presidents of the Mattie Miracle Cancer Foundation. Thank you again.
Oh,
Thank
Good
you,
luck
Karen.
with this. This is a great thing you're doing.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching, everybody. Keep watching. We're Forward Motion. We're on Facebook, Twitter, all the stuff, all the social media, and they are too. I've liked them. So we'll see you next time. I'm Karen Allyn. Thanks for watching. Bye bye, everybody.